بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الهزن إذا شئت سهلا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I praise Allah. I ask Allah to send countless salutations and blessings on Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his kind al and companions, and to grant his Muslim nation safety from everything that he feared for it. I remind myself and I remind you all with having the sincere intention. Inshallah, today we're going to start tonight with our discussion on the state of Islam in Black America, and we're going to tackle the issues of gender equality in Islam and the activity of Muslims in the Black Lives Matter movement and the situation in our country today. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll have our guest speakers and guests, Imam Dawud Walid and Shaykha Ustadha Ieasha Prime, who will be joining us in a few. And inshallah, assalamu alaikum, Imam Dawud.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shaykhna.
We're going to start this conversation with you having an open introduction and a little about yourself, and in briefly summarizing your thoughts of the state of Islam in Black America.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. First of all, Sheikh Amin, and to the community of the believers in Atlantic City, I am grateful to Allah Azza wa Jal to have this opportunity to be on this platform. And I've been and visit you a couple of times in Atlantic City with the community there. And inshallah, when things are able to open up, we pray to Allah Azza wa Jal that we can have the opportunity to go back to Jersey and to benefit from the suhbah of you and the believers there in Atlantic City. The state of Islam in Black America, from my perspective, and I always like to start off with the positive first, or optimism, and it should be the inclination of the believer that we try to be optimistic and point out the good first before critiquing things that are perhaps we may see need to be improved. So alhamdulillah, Islam as far as in America and Black America in particular, that I believe that there's a revival of traditional Islam in Black America, where people are giving themselves towards traditional studies, where we actually have not what we used to have in the past, where we had many sincere brothers who were hardworking for the community, but perhaps weren't as studied or learned traditionally. Alhamdulillah, we have many du'at, and actually I would even say scholars that are amongst us now, amongst the men and the women in our community, and a group of people who are younger than us, who are in their teens, who are giving themselves to traditional studies, hufaz. We know that our beloved Imam Abdul Malik, Hafidhullah, is working on this endeavor with the Mi'raj Academy that are producing hufaz. And I say fubu, right? Like for us and by us, right? So alhamdulillah, this is something that is a fath, or an opening for Muslims. And I will say that this is something that Dr. Akbar Muhammad, rahmatullah alayhi. This was the brother of Imam Muhammad, rahmatullah alayhi, the brother who graduated from Al Azhar back in the day. He said that if this community doesn't embrace the Quran and traditional knowledge, that this community would cease to exist. He said this, right? So, alhamdulillah, we are latching on to this more, and may Allah have mercy on all of our predecessors, those who have passed on, and may Allah continue to preserve those of our elders who are amongst us who were striving and still striving sincerely for the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. And really, we are standing on the shoulders of many of those great people who came from the leadership of Imam Muhammad, came from the Dar. Those people like Imam Salim Joseph, who took the Tariqatul Qadariyah back in the old days, back when Sheikh Hassan Sise first came and introduced the Tariqah in the 70s here in America and in Detroit. So we're thankful for all of that and all of what they did for us. And we can never thank Allah enough for all of these different movements inside of us that paved the way for the practice of traditional Islam and us connecting back to the chains of transmission of this deen. So alhamdulillah, we're thankful for that. What I do see some things that we need to improve on as Muslims in Black America is firstly our institutions, right? Is our institutions that, and I mentioned that term FUBU, but we have to think more about sustainability, right? And this relates to economics. I know in a number of cities where there are masajid in our community relating to economic situations that they're barely functioning or they're barely holding on. We have Islamic schools in our community that are doing the best they can, that are barely making it from school year to school year, right? And so this requires for us to go back to a model, I believe, of doing for self, of us encouraging entrepreneurship in our community, collective economics, in the establishment of what we don't have really, except for, we could say, under the leadership of the Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam, which Imam Pleeman, Hafidahullah, and Imam Pasha, Rahmatullah alayhi, in which Imam Suleiman Hamid now is the leader of that community, where there's a type of awqaf, right, which means endowments where there's business interests and there's rental properties and other things that help support the institutions, such as the masjid and Sister Claire Muhammad School down there, Imam Warfdi Muhammad High School, and things like that. So we have to think more about how are we going to be able to sustain and grow our community institutions. This is a challenge for us and something that we need to pay more attention to. Then I also say from the broader level is that we have to get back to a people of dawah and inviting our people, Black folks, back to Islam. And I mean, not just invite them to the masjid, but to give them alternative paradigms and alternative language, right? So what I've seen is that, especially since post 9/11, that many of us have been so quick to run underneath other people's umbrellas, right? That we haven't taken leadership. We're so quick to use everyone else's jargon, everyone else's nomenclature, follow everyone else's secular paradigms of organizing, of other people's secular based epistemologies about how we actually see truth, that we've actually forsaken dawah. And I believe in many of our circles, we've sought more so of being leaders than actually following the ways of of people who are Black, who are in fact, some of these movements and ideologies, which we'll get to later, are actually very irreverent. They're irreverent. And some of them are even hostile towards things in the Quran. So they're actually hostile, right? But we're following people down the lizard hole intellectually and in our activism. So this is something that I think that is a great challenge for us, and this is the responsibility for all of us to not only connect back to our spiritual transmission of our deen, but to encourage us to critically think more instead of just going by, as Imam Muhammad said, rahmatullahi alayhi, just going by the winds of emotions, that we just go by trends or go by this intellectual trend or what Fulan bin Fulan or Chuck is teaching in the university as a frame of reference of how we should see truth and organize our lives here in the wilderness of North America.
So relating to that, so more on the topic that we're talking about, the issue of Black people and Black Muslims. And I have a saying that I've always said, and I've seen that sometimes we as Muslims in America, Black Muslims in America, that we, I believe in a way, have become detached from the reality of our people. So one of the things that I always say is that the same issues and concerns that are of Black people are the same issues and concerns of Black Muslims. And in terms of, sometimes it's like people would feel that I've become a Muslim now, and the issues that confront the Black community as a whole no longer affect me. Have you noticed this trend, and what do you think are solutions to solving that problem?
Well, I think people like yourself have pointed towards it, Sheikh, that we need a very clear and concise, we need a very clear and comprehensive discourse to remind our people and to point our people back towards our connection towards our qawm, right? The Black people who are non-Muslim, we're all still one qawm. We come from a shared historical lineage, and also that we have to offer people who's inside of our community a program, right? So what I've seen is that, and I mentioned connection back to the teachers abroad and to spiritual chains, and that's good. But there's been some of us, and without mentioning any specific movements, but there's some of us that we took that of studying abroad or connecting with scholars abroad, be it traditional Islam or others who claim to be the real Ahlul Sunnah, which I think is a false claim, but that's for another discussion as well, probably. But are living vicariously through things overseas, because that's easy to live vicariously about what's going on in this country or what's going on in that country, and this scholar and this scholar, without applying that and taking responsibility and ownership for us seeking to change the condition of our communities here and to bring with solutions of changing things at the grassroots level for Black people in general, which we have the first responsibility to help them in their affairs, just as the Prophet alayhi salam, after he gave the dawah and the call to the people inside of his household and also to his close people, his friends like Abu Bakr Siddiq, that he called the people of his ashira, right? Those people who were close to them, that's who he called. And those were the first people that he had the message for the Risala, and also to give them solutions to their problems right in Mecca, right? So I think this is one thing that some of us, or many of us, we've taken the easy way out of this living vicariously through this movement or through this sheikh or this particular minhaj that's somewhere over there. And it's in a way, we didn't view that properly, right, in our application of having a program to deal with the issues that that plague our communities that we live in.
So this can tie right into something you've been writing and talking about, is Islamic social activism among Black Muslims. And so when you speak about that, what do you mean by that? And can you give us an examples how Muslims should be actively involved in the Black struggle here in America?
Yeah, so in my book, Towards Sacred Activism, I put in there that, and I wrote that basically when we're talking about activism and social justice, that from a traditional foundational perspective, or what we say from a usuli perspective, that this falls under the category of el amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, of enjoying the good and forbidding the evil, which is Imam Amin Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi, and many other scholars have mentioned this, that number one, that this is a community responsibility. So it's called fardun kifaya, right? So the community has to organize itself. There has to be some leadership, and it has to organize itself to promote those things that are good in the society. And us Muslims, we should be the foremost in cultivating that good, and those things that are antisocial, as well as those things that are unjust, that we should be the primary people of organizing ourselves to give solutions towards those things that are morally indecent in the public sphere, as well as injustices. And Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions this in the Quran. وَتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. That is a imperative command. Let there be among you a group that calls towards khair and enjoins the good proven standards and forbids those things that are morally repugnant and unjust. And these will be the successful people. So if we aren't building successful community life as Muslims, then we have to look back and see, are we fulfilling these conditions of this command that Allah Azza wa Jal gave us in this ayah, for instance, right? So we have the obligation not just to be in our masajid, or not just to be in the zawiya, but we have to go and engage our people in the broader society. Now, it just can't be any old way, because we as Muslims, and actually ultimately, when we're talking about activism, our goal is ultimately Allah. Like, that's our objective. Allah should be our ultimate objective, right? As the dua, Ilahi enta maqsudi wa ridaka matlubi, right? Allah, He's our ultimate. Oh Allah, you are my ultimate objective. You're my ultimate one that I'm seeking, and your felicity, your pleasure, that's my desire. That's what I'm seeking, right? So Allah is the ultimate objective. Now, within that, we're seeking justice in the built healthy community and healthy society. So besides us using the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Ijma' as our basis, because we believe in objective truth. We don't believe everything is subjective, right? We believe there is such thing as an objective truth. There are certain things that are clearly right and clearly wrong that aren't left up for public opinion polls or the winds of emotions. So we have that criterion, but then we as Muslims, we can't say that the ends justify the means. So the goal is Allah. That objective has to be sacred, but the means that we use have to also be within the parameters of the sacred law, number one. And then also regulated by proper comportment or proper etiquettes, of what we would call adab. And there's a spiritual relationship with this too. So we have the law, but we also have spirit, right? And the akhlaq that goes along with that, for having ethical ethics or ethical demonstration along with that in regards to the means. So when we're talking about, at least when I wrote about sacred activism, that's the philosophical premise for where I start at in when I wrote the book.
So it's about time for you to pray now, right?
Yeah, it's Maghrib just came in 4 minutes ago, Sayyidi.
So why don't you quickly, if you can go pray. We're still waiting for Shaykha Ieasha Prime. Maybe she's having some problem with the getting in or the links. But in the meanwhile, I'll hold it for you until you come back. So
thank you. And please elaborate, Sayyidi, and also correct any mistake that I made in what I just said. Please
just hold your space on your screen so you don't got to log back in. And then when you come back, and I'll inshallah maintain for the short brief moment you're going to pray.
Okay, all right.
Barakallahu bikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu alayhi Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to share some important things about the purpose of the Black Imams Roundtable. We're still waiting for Shaykha Ustadha Ieasha Prime. Maybe she had some issues that she had to take care of first, and hopefully she will be joining us, inshallah. But the purpose of this Black Imams Roundtable was to bring many people in the Black Islamic community that have different functions or positions within the community to discuss concerns of the community and to come up collectively with solutions or approaches to those concerns to bring out a better community. And what I've noticed as an imam, that oftentimes we don't have interaction with the broader community in Islam and outside of Islam. So meaning all of our Muslim activity is usually local. So there is not really like a agreed upon national voice among Muslims to confront issues. MashaAllah, then I can cut short. Alhamdulillah. But so our concern was, this is like for myself, a continuation of the African American Islamic Summit, where we brought leaders from around the country to address our concerns. And this is another way on a social media platform where we can discuss our issues more in intimate conversation and divide the subject load according to people and their skill set. So with that, that is our intention, and that's what you're noticing with the programming that we're having. Alhamdulillah, our Shaykha Ieasha Prime, who has the staff there, but I say Shaykha, right? She has joined us, and inshallah, Imam Dawud, he's went to pray, so he'll be back. But I'll let you, inshallah, address the opening topic. What is your perception of Islam, the state of Islam in Black America?
You were like, this is the crux, Rabbi ishrah li sadri yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. We're at a very important point in our development, where it really is a case of we get this right, or we're going to be left behind in a multitude of ways. And so on one hand, I'm extremely grateful for the progress, as well as the resilience that I'm seeing in the Black Muslim community. And yet there's so much work that has to be done, so many conversations, so many uncomfortable conversations that have to be had in order for us to get to the level of healing that is necessary in order to move on. right? Like there's certain diseases we're not even willing to diagnose, and in order to say, okay, now we need to develop a healing for this, and then to develop institution around it so that we don't fall into the same problems that we're in before. But again, you know, when I think about the state of Islam in Black America, there's a deep sense of hope, right? There's a deep sense of hope, and there's a deep sense of trepidation at the same time, because I feel like we definitely are at this point where either we're going to move forward and progress in a manner that is so helpful, so beneficial, that could change the landscape of America as we know it, or we could see it being wiped out. We could see Islam in the Black community being wiped out. And Allah guide us and grant us hidayah. That's my opening statement.
Is the echo removed? Everyone can hear clearly?
I can hear you clearly, yeah.
Okay. So the second question was the same question that was asked to Imam Dawud.
Assalamu alaikum, Ieasha.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, doing good.
It is the issue of the concerns of Black America in general is usually the same concerns that are affecting Black Muslims. But we find sometimes Muslims who are from African American descent or Black in Islam, they seem to at times be detached from the same issues or activism within the issues that concern Black America. And could you address this issue, this concern?
I mean, 100%. The issues that affect Black America are, you know, Black Muslims are being affected by the issues that affect Black America on a multitude, internally as well as externally. So meaning we are suffering some of the same things within the battle, within our personal selves, within our families, within our communities, definitely with inside of our religious spaces. We're experiencing some of the same challenges. And as it relates to activism, I think this is why, because we are seeing so many of the same issues, this is why a lot of Black American Muslims have decided, let me join in terms of the mass movements, those who have gained traction in this particular area. Let me go ahead and sign on to these particular movements, in addition to, because they don't necessarily, and this is part of a religious crisis as well as the crisis of the masjid, they're not seeing that type of progressive action. And I know, God help, we have to be so careful about using the term progressive, but they're not seeing that kind of action that moves the community forward in a way that they feel it has substantial changes from an internal perspective. So I mean, 100%, we're seeing some of the same, definitely as it relates to economic crisis, as it relates to relevancy, as it relates to whether or not we're able to hold on to our youth, whether or not we can build our capacity, our building power and capacity, whether or not we're coming together collectively and pooling our economics, how are we actively addressing mental health care. We have the same issues. Black American Muslims are having the same issues that Black America is having. And it's actually sad, because I'm not sure, you know, and I'd like to get, you know, Imam Dawud's feedback in terms, and I can't say across the board, you know, I can't say across the board that we aren't employing our tradition in a way that does bring about the healing. We do have that in pockets. I am, you know, for me, I'm optimistic in the point that I'm looking forward to us coming together as a whole, and how do we push this tradition further down the field so that we can, because our job is to connect the creation to the creator, right? The job of the Sharia is to provide access to the water. So we don't just leave people in the desert. You know, our job in being the proverbial Musa, right, is not to lead people into the desert without leading them into the promised land. And so that's my deep concern about some of the direction of things that are some of the direction of some aspects of activism, that we may be leading them out of one aspect, but leading them to a desert without pushing them into the promised land. And that happens when we get confused between our objective, our immediate objectives, and our goals. Like the journey of Islam is not to get you to the car, right? Like we all going on a trip to the car. The journey to get, let's address issues of structural racism so that we can get us to be whole people that are connected to Allah.
So last question, because he had 3, so I'll give you the 3rd one as well, so we'll all be caught up. How should Muslims engage in social activism, especially with all the things that are happening in the country now? What should be the position, especially Black Muslims, and how should they be socially active in these times?
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna let did Imam Dawud, I mean, of course, the writer of the book Towards Sacred Activism.
Yours are probably better.
I'm sorry, Imam, say again.
I gave my answer, but yours will probably be better. So Bismillah.
I don't know about better. I mean, you're the expert in this. You know, I'm concerned that we have taken activism to mean something only for an elite group of people, as opposed to that each one of us has been entrusted with something, with a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that plays a very critical role in this struggle. That we are going to need those who understand how to galvanize and organize community. We need those who are politically savvy. We need those who focused on economics and finances. We need those who are permaculture. We need to know, because in order to address, in order to develop an abolitionist movement, especially in modern day times, we are not going to be successful in that long term if we're still dependent on somebody else to feed and clothe us, right? So we need those who are homesteading, those who are, who are knowing how to build their own homes, from tiny houses, those who are, we need the artists at this point. We need those who understand how to not only sew clothes like the nation used to talk. We need entire factories in order to take us from off the amen. In order to take us off the milk of colonialism and off the milk of that which currently feeds us, we have got to become independent in a way that we have not seen us collectively yet. And that requires a different mindset. So when you ask me in terms of what do we need, in terms of what is sacred activism is using that skill, that resource, that call that wakes people up in the middle of the night and says, I've got to, either whether it's I'm going to write this book, or I'm going to write this vlog, or whether or not it's, I need to sew these masks, or whether or not I got to find an economic solution for my people. I got to figure out how I'm going to build an education institution. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get our people some mental health and healing. In whatever it is, whatever talent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put inside of each and every one of us, now is the time more than ever for us to bring those fingers together in order to push it forward. It's not this field is not a game for the elite. So this title, like the activist only belongs to this group of people, not at all. Not at all. That's my opinion on that.
So moving to the issue more closer to the topics that we mentioned was the issue of gender relations among Muslims and in our sacred spaces, in our community activism, and all spheres of our Islamic life. How do you see the issue of gender relations? Imam Dawud, I'll leave you to start that off.
Well, I'm going to repeat something that my brother from another mother, Dr. Bilal Ware, Hafidhullah, has been saying constantly. And we have to be very clear about this, that there is no station in Islam, be it scholarly or spiritual, that a man can rise up to that also a woman cannot equally rise up to. I have to say that again. There is no station in Islam.
Imam Dawud, Ustad Ieasha, could you, when you off the mic, could you mute your mic? So, because there's some echoing.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, go ahead, Imam Dawud.
So I'm going to repeat what I just said, that there is no scholarly nor spiritual station that a man can achieve in Islam that a woman also does not have equal access and can reach that same scholarly or spiritual station of a man. And I have to say that because there's some misunderstandings that people have, or maybe just a simple lack of education, that some brothers think that they are more intellectually or spiritually superior to women. And that's not the case, and that's not from our tradition. Actually, I spoke about this during Shahr Ramadan, where I spoke about Sayyidina Nafisa, anha, who actually, according to a number of accounts, she actually was a murshida, or she was the spiritual guide of Imam Shafi'i, rahmatullahi alayhi, where a woman was the Shaykha, or the spiritual guide of one of the greatest scholars in the history of Islamic civilization. His ustada was a sister, right? So I mean, and we can, there's so many fadail and virtues, not just of her, but the primary teacher of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who we got the majority of his ijazat from, was a woman. Of Sayyida Maryam Obuso, the mother of Sidi Tuba, Ahmadu Bamba, right? So we can go all throughout this history. I think the problem is that some of us don't know it, and the sisters need to know this too, because some of the sisters may actually believe the false notion that somehow brothers are just more inclined, or maybe have some sort of spiritual station inherently over women. Now we do know there's physiological differences, and we know we know that the male's not like the female, so we do know that there is differences, and they can play themselves out differently in society. But I think I will leave it at that for my portion of the comments. And I know that Ustad Ieasha, may Allah bless her, has really talked about this in depth, and there's definitely more of her expertise to talk about than mine.
Shaykha Ieasha, you're up.
Bismillah. I wouldn't say that, I'm more of an expert than you, Imam, that mashallah, you're doing you're doing wonderful things, and you've started us off, definitely on the right track. As we're talking about gender equity, Imam Dawud, he laid it out in terms of when we're talking about equity in Islam, from is the male, والمؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر, that the men and women, that the believing men and the believing women, that they are guardians and protectors of each other, right? They enjoin the good and forbid the evil. So in terms of from an Islamic standpoint, I don't think that any of us, I hope not, Imam Dawud is right in the sense that we are still struggling in many cases where there are people, we are thinking, we are still caught up on anecdotal hadith as it relates to, is a woman lacking in her intellect? Is she, we, without looking at the context of that hadith, nor looking at the entirety of the details that go into Quran and Kareem, right? And so, but if I understand the purpose of tonight correctly, and help me, because I want to make sure that I act within that purpose and I don't, fiddle around with our time. Is that the Black Imams Roundtable, is that you want us to kind of delve into what of some of the gender issues within our community. Am I right?
That's correct.
Right. Okay. So I think there is a lot to unpack, right? I think there is a lot to address within our framework, within that being specifically connected to the Black American Muslim. Because as you mentioned earlier, as we talked, that some of the same things that have affected the Black community have affected the Black Muslim community, and particularly as it relates to colonialization of the mind. And I say that to say, because in our first understanding of where that colonization comes from, right, the occupation of the mind, where that comes from, this also came with certain Christian hegemony. It came with certain ideals, certain understanding about things. And so one of the things that came along with that was two beliefs. Number one, that man was the manifestation of God, that man would be the manifestation of how God would become present in the world. And so we saw that in our history, right? We saw that ideology come in our Black Muslim history, where we have this idea that man is in this certain position, not a daraja of responsibility, sometimes not even a daraja in terms of Allah has given him a responsibility because he gave woman a different responsibility, but looking at it literally as a hierarchy. And this understanding of hierarchy is actually not something that is from our tradition in that sense, right? In that sense, and the way they understand it and the way we understand it is different. That women are superior to men in their category, and men are superior to women in their category. They're mutually superior to each other in their own right. Right? That the man is not like the woman, the male is not like the female. And so inside of that, right, in the embrace of that, because it didn't come alone, that understanding that structure of patriarchy, how that played into the Black community specifically, is because when you're talking about a people who are oppressed, when you are talking about a people who are looking for power somewhere, then these power dynamics showed up not only in our home, but they began to show up in our masajid. Right? So basically there was this opinion that either you could either be in a position of service in the masjid, or you could be in no position at all. Either you serving food in that kitchen, or you don't have any place in this masjid at all. And so for that created a number of wicked dynamics for us that we find ourselves in right now, where you have women who are educated, talented, are organized, everything from they are creative, they're organizers, they can get it done, and they're great leaders, right? But when those skills were not being accessed in our communities, they literally not necessarily by will, right, but by force, literally took those talents, those resources, and that education and took it somewhere else. And as a result of taking that skills, that resources, that funding, somewhere else, we are behind as a community, right? Not to mention what that kind of dynamic, how it left a very serious imprint in terms of our families. And so, we could look at anything from the Black American community suffered deeply, what I would call the Black exploitation film, right? Where this idea, this definition of masculinity was a domination of women, was a pimping of women, was this type of, even to the point of what we would consider pornography, the debasing of women sexually. That showed up in our masjids, in our masajid. That showed up in our Muslim homes. That showed up in the way that we begin to address our families, leaving people broken, leaving people to leave the deen, leaving people to conclude is that if this is leaving people to conclude is that if this is what Islam is, I want no parts of it, right? Even though that wasn't a correct explanation, leaving people to even take certain Islamic passages and almost like, you know, superimpose them on this ideology, saying that you should be dominated because you are, you know, weaker in your intellect because you have a menstrual cycle that actually produces human beings, right? Or it broke up families to the point that even women begin to say, well, if this is what Islam is, I'm out. If this is how you're defining it, and even the definition of femininity became so small, right? That no, barely most women couldn't fit. Most Black women with a legacy of strength and power and ability, they can't fit in that box. So it was like, well, then you don't fit a white woman's definition of femininity. So basically, you're not feminine. This don't work for me. Creating a legacy of scars, leaving us in a very dangerous situation. And women being able to say, well, you know, even in this definition of manhood, it was so small that even most men couldn't fit into it without morphing themselves into something that was even unnatural to them, by putting themselves in a position that even themselves they couldn't live up to, just creating disappointment in the children because this structure, this power structure was not our structure. It was not from our tradition. And by following it, we only hurt ourselves, our families, and our communities. And it becomes extremely necessary at this point that we re-examine our tradition, take it up as it is, as the Prophet ﷺ intended it, right? And then reapply and repent and repent. I called him out. I was like, you really want to, Lord have mercy. I'm gonna calm down.
Barakallahu fiki. Imam Dawud, I have a question for you related to what Shaykha Ieasha was talking about. As we talk about this dynamic of the inequality sometimes, or the covert oppression of women in our Islamic or sacred spaces, as you had a lot of experience with African or West African Islam, and through your education and your studies through African scholarship, what is a way that the Black woman, the African woman in those communities, and how they operate in sacred spaces, as opposed to what you see here in America, in context with what Shaykha Ieasha mentioned?
Well, there's two things. There's one in the broader public space, and then there's also in the sacred space. So in many of the market spaces in places in West Africa, is actually, you'll see that women have equal footing, and in some cases, maybe even are dominant in some spaces when it comes to the marketplace and trading. You know, actually, about a year and a half ago, when I was in Ghana with my Murabbi, Sheikh Ali Suleiman Ali Hausawi, may Allah preserve him, that if you're like in Accra, for instance, you see that the marketplaces, even on the roadsides, are dominated by sisters, and even sisters who are like muhajibat, who are out there. So it's not seen as problematic for women to be in the public space conducting business and with an equal footing with menfolk, right? So that's not something that's seen as problematic. Inside the community, there are so many women who are learned in the Islamic sciences, and many times they don't teach men. In some cases they do and give ijaza to certain things like hadith, for instance, to men. But these are the people who are the initial trainers of the children, like in the Quran school. Like, for instance, and I know Ustada Ieasha Prime, we were all together on a trip, and her husband was there. We were Sheikh Mendes, Dr. Ware with the African American Institute, and Sayyidah Khadija that was there, where they're teaching the young, the boys and the young men, as well as the women, teaching them Quran, teaching them like the basics of Maliki fiqh and these things. It's the women. And then also in a number of the prayer spaces, because the women, according to fiqh, can't lead the salah, right? Can't lead salah. However, and I witnessed this so many times in Mali, where the person leading the prayer will be the man, but afterwards, the one that would make the dua would be this the elder woman or the scholar who's womanly, that there be a microphone or area in the back, but then she would make the dua, because she's limited to doing this according to fiqh as leading the salah, but she'll make dua. And even in Senegal, this is very popular, but is not seen as ab or problematic. But women reciting the Quran, opening up conferences, to like reading the qasaid of Shaykh al-Islam Ibrahim Inyas, and you'll see the women are the ones that are reciting these Islamic poems praising the Prophet alayhi salam, and is not seen as problematic. So the women are infused in, they're acculturated and given a voice in the sacred spaces. And this is not something that is, at least in Mali and in Senegal, Gambia area, this is not uncommon at all. In fact, it's something that is seen. I know Ustad Ieasha, she's seen it with her own eyes as well, right? So that's something that we don't have in many of our spaces in our community amongst Black American Muslims.
So to Shaykha Ieasha, since, as Imam Dawud mentioned, that this is something that y'all both witnessed, and we're safely to assume, because that's a culture, and that culture usually reached them continuously from generation to generation as they received their Islam. Two questions wrapped around that. Why has that not been implemented in our masajid in the Black community in America? And how do we achieve that? First, why it hasn't happened, and how do we solve or remedy the problem that caused it not to happen, so that this type of gender equality and uplifting of each gender can be implemented within our sacred spaces?
I mean, I think we didn't, I think it wasn't implemented because we didn't have it as an example. I mean, I think you just hit that on the head. Like, for the majority, there were still, for those who studied inside of West Africa and were able to witness that, you know, they're not always in prominent leadership inside of what we would consider the mainstream Black Muslim community. And so many of the ones that we see who are mostly out front studied in universities or in environments where not only was that not seen, it wasn't something that was encouraged. And so I think that we again have to examine the way that we were taught to view women. With, you know, we need to examine that. We need to examine Quranic ethics and Quranic principles around gender and gender equality and gender definitions, right? I think that that's something we have to, you know, revisit. And then I think that we have to become creative. I just don't think it wasn't in our imagination, to be honest, because we just looked at, again, within a Christian structure, within a church-like structure, there's pretty much, you know, the minister, right, the leader, and we that was it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the clergy. That's the main important person inside of that religious space. So when we begin to look at how the masjid is defined, we have to say, well, is there positions of leadership, positions of prominence, positions of influence within the masjid structure, within our organizational structure, where women can take on spiritual leadership and religious leadership without it, you know, just basically, can women take on spiritual and religious leadership inside of that space. And I think we, so far, the way we've imagined our spaces are the imam leads and teaches, and it's just him and the support staff. As you know, and maybe we'll ask them to organize something, the fundraise for the masjid. And so it just requires a more comprehensive thinking. It requires us to bring those talents, those resources, those skills of people who know how to build community back into masajid, inside of those spaces, and begin to build out what does community, inclusive community look like, so that little girls will grow up inside of the masjid and say, there is a place for me here. And little boys will grow up inside of the masjid almost never even having to be taught, because they saw women respected. They knew that as a reality. They saw that being lived every day. So I think that's, in addition to, we have to think about, for example, even when we're teaching, right, from the minbar, when we're teaching durus, we're teaching classes, are we introducing the teachings of our teachers Nafisa or Nana Asmo? Are we teaching the teachings of Maryam? Are female scholarship a part of, are the texts that we're reading? Are they being addressed from the minbar? Even in spaces, even when African American Muslims or Black Muslims, even when we're talking about from a social justice movement perspective, right? Inside of the masjid or inside of religious community, are we mentioning, right, the list of women who have died in this process? Or are we the same, in the rest, that not mentioning the list of women who died in this process, right? We know like Breonna Taylor, but we're not like mentioning Maryam Clemens. We're not mentioning for some reason, my brain's going completely blank. I mean, just the list of women who have been shot and killed, for example, by police in the last year. There are a number of them. Even in the case of when we talked about Stephon Clark and we talked about Alton Sterling, we never mentioned, for example, even Jamila Akram, right? A Black Muslim woman who was shot by police. There are very few cases where we find Black Muslims actually fighting on behalf of Black women in those settings and situations. Even when we talk about reentry programs, right? Most of our reentry programs, that when we build them into the masajid, we're talking about men. We're not talking about the Muslim women who are in prison and what kind of support they need while they're in prison. A lot of the way our institutions are structured are male focused, right? And so I think there's a lot to be done in terms of reimagining our spaces in order to be equal spaces, truly.
Now, here's a question, because I have a real great concern of how Islam has reached most of us, which we call authentic Islam or traditional Islam or Sunni Islam, because these issues that we're talking about, when many of us, I would say the vast majority of Black Americans, when we came to Islam, these were not issues. So what we thought was Islam, even if some of our theological concepts were incorrect, and definitely they were, but the issue of gender wasn't a major issue. So people who came from the Nation of Islam, like you had a Fruit of Islam, you had an MVP. And like the background I grew up from, we had men in the Ansar Allah community, and the women, they had their space and they had their role in the community, and it was a very important role. But all of those communities and those like them were mostly predominantly Black communities, and the issue of family, the issue of respecting and protecting women and raising and elevating the status of women and children was part and parcel of that movement, what they consider Islam. My question to you is, where did we lose that? To have this discussion now where we're saying, well, we got to uplift our women, when it was a time, if you said Muslim in the Black community, that was a focal point that their women were empowered and protected and provided for, where do we lose that? Imam Dawud, I would like both of y'all to answer.
I want to say one thing about what you said. There was a time when they were more provided for financially. There was a time when they were more protected, for sure. I'm not, I would have to, I gotta think, I mean, I want to think about the term empowered in those communities. Now, in the Imam or Din community, for sure, they definitely, we found them in positions of leadership. Yeah, I want to think more about that as Imam Dawud answers.
Yeah, you actually were, I think, somewhat reading my mind a little bit, Ustad Ieasha, and what you said opening up. So I'll give you a little context since I'm from Detroit, and we're the former Temple #1 off of Linwood and Burlingame. Later on became Masjid Wali Muhammad. I remember when I moved to Detroit back in the late 90s. I remember that Masjid Wali Muhammad used to be referred to, which is in the Jama'ah, the Association of Imam Wafdi Muhammad Rahmatullahi alayhi. It was referred to as, well, you know, that's the sister masjid, right?
So, Shaykha Ieasha, if you put on mute, there's echoing.
So I remember when I first moved to Detroit that I used to hear other Muslims who were black, were referred to Masjid Wali Muhammad as the sisters masjid. So that's the sister masjid. Why? Because sisters would say things openly during community meetings, that there actually were sisters on the board of directors. So therefore, that was considered to be a sister masjid. So this community grew out of those who were in the Nation of Islam. And obviously, we're not saying that everything in the Nation of Islam was perfect. I mean, not just Aqidah-wise, but even socially. And Ustad Ieasha alluded to it with this whole concept of the black man being God, and then the black woman wasn't a goddess; she was a degree below the God, right? And all that's problematic theology, even with FOI and MGT and how it played itself out. But long story short, in some other jama'at, I believe that we as black people who are Muslims, we took on an understanding of Islam that was foreign to the black experience, and we followed movements that originated from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or Pakistan, and tried to impose those locally on our community. And by the way, even those movements are disconnected from traditional Asanid. I just got to throw that out there as well. And I think that we started copying the ways of Saudis and Egyptians and Pakistanis from particular movements, not all, but from, I'm thinking of 3 particular movements without calling them out by name. And we impose their understandings, not only of Islam, but we impose their understandings of gender dynamics from their countries that really weren't working that well, and tried to impose that on the black woman, right? So I'm sorry if that offends anybody, but like that's I've been saying that for over 2 decades.
And you know that wasn't gonna work. So that's not gonna work, right? You can't, any way that you can take a gender dynamic of Saudi Arabia or any other country for that matter and put it on the dynamics of Black American women and Black American Muslim women, just based historically on the type of strength that was necessary for their survival, that wasn't going to work, right? Even just based on historically the legacy of what happened through slavery, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, what she endured, what she had to stand for, what she had to focus on, how she had to even keep her family together. That's not, that kind of dynamic is not going to work in this situation. But you know, I think we took it lock, stock, and barrel because there was an internalized message of everything about you, Black people, is messed up, right? Everything about you is a pathology. You know, you individually have a problem, your family, and everything about you. So therefore, there was a belief that since our family is broken, let's try somebody else's way, right? Why not knowing how to, not always knowing how to heal those wounds, in order to rebuild based upon our situation, our circumstances, with our culture intact, with leading with the tradition. And again, part of that is about the way that we were oftentimes even taught the tradition, right? Was with had some of that in it. The way that even had, you know, many of us, the way that it was the tradition was brought had some undertones of sexism, had some undertones of racism as well. So you combine these two together, right? So the undertone of racism that was oftentimes present, that we kind of were able to kind of push to the side and push through sometimes, along with the undertone of sexism. So you combine these two together, and the view of you know, the view of Black family was really really pushed down, except the Black family was viewed as something that was important and paramount inside the nation. It was viewed as something that was important and paramount inside the Imam Muhammad community. Outside of that, we were struggling with, you know, how do we, and so there was just a battle within the Muslim community, because there was like, okay, well, if you came from the nation or you came from the Imam Muhammad, you don't know your deen, so we can't accept your gender politics either, right? And over here, I know my deen, but your gender ethics is messed up. And so how do we begin to recognize it's for us to come back together and heal these wounds and reclaim our family, right? Reclaim our communities. Otherwise, we're definitely gonna be lost. And that's, you know, that's my concern, is can we claim it on authenticity? Can we claim it, you know, with love and authenticity and from a perspective of healing?
So I'm going to add an element of controversy here, because there is a discussion that I hear, and it's all in the chat box, and there is a concern that this is the effect of what I have coined default Wahhabism in the Black community. And I hear each of you talking about traditional Islam and Islamic tradition and these things. So how has that brand of understanding Islam affected the Black community, as well as gender relations and everything else? And what do we need to do based on what you're considering traditional Islam? How do we readjust ourselves within Islam in correcting these errors? Whoever wants to go first.
Bismillah.
Well, I finished. I was gonna let you. I'm gonna let you go if you don't mind.
Well, what Sheikh Amin was talking about from my perspective, in what we would call pseudo Salafism, or what others would call Wahhabism, and is a type of very dry understanding of Islam that came into our community, meaning that there was discussions on Aqidah, which was very polemical in nature, and its discussions were very adversarial to the point of paying other people deviants or even outside of the fold of Islam, and then a preoccupation with fiqh rulings relating to certain things that are disconnected from real usul, or real like methodology of understanding jurisprudence. But what was lacking is any talk about really tazkiyah, or spiritual purification, which really gives sweetness and really gives taste to Islam. And there is no healing of hearts, and there is no healing from the trauma that we faced here in the United States of America as Black people without remedies to deal with this trauma and deal with the issues that affect our hearts. And there is no akhlaqiyat or ethical life in society without having spiritual purification. So many of us accepted or have been influenced by a brand of Islam that was stripped from spirituality, that would give us the spiritual remedies and the empowerment that we would need to be able to heal our families, to be able to bring healing to the broader Black community, right? So the solution is to connect back to traditional Islam and to back to those things that can help us feel whole spiritually, to give healing to the soul. And some would call it tazkiyah, and I'm going to be flat out and say that I call it tasawwuf.
And that's that. So, I mean, Imam Dawud hit on it, and I want to talk about just a couple of points of tasawwuf, and it has to relate, of course, to the struggle with the ego and the nafs. Is that many of this, from a spiritual perspective of why this still exists in our families, is that we're trying to usurp a type of power from each other that we have yet to be able to gain in other aspects of our life. And so there's even this conversation that happens in the home around what my right is, give me my rights, or this is my right. When all of that is problematic, lest Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ask us about his rights. And so being able to sincerely rid ourselves of trying to usurp our power because we are not excelling or succeeding or feeling empowered in other aspects of our life, trying to usurp that power from each other within the family dynamic is killing us. So from a tasawwuf and a tazkiyah aspect, that's that. I think I do applaud you, Imam Amin, because what you have done and what you have introduced, that I can say outside of very small circles, is that introducing Black women from a position of scholarship, from Islamic scholarship, and centering that in your masjid, as well as on your platforms. We didn't see a whole lot of that in our community, from scholarship, from speaking about it from a scholarship perspective. And I think, like, for example, to invite women to an imam's Black roundtable discussion, that wasn't happening before, right? Because we literally were having debates about, are these women trying to be imams, right? These women trying to take our positions, they trying to take our place. When being imam, I'm just, is one role, right? There's ustad, there's shaykha, there's qadi, there's, there's a number of, there's mufti, there's a whole bunch of other positions on the team that, there's no reason to fight for that. Like, our understanding of clergy, again, is different. So I think there needs to be the coming together of both of those voices, that the male and female voice has to be present in the masjid from the perspective of, from a position of leadership, from a position of scholarship, from a position of spiritual guidance. That has to be, that both perspectives have to be present. Like, I mean, and the reality of it is, it's long past time. We write a lot of books about history, and we write a lot of books about our history, but we do need to write from our perspective in terms of our theology, in terms of our understanding, right? Like the Sheikh Ibrahim Ilyas, our understanding of Quran. This is long overdue. I give it, to our sister Nuruddin Knight in terms of publishing, and we should, get it, the 40 hadith of Ieasha, radiallahu ta'ala an, but in terms of some commentary on that as it relates to our situation, right? Understanding versus, in like the first chapter of Surah An-Nisa. right? For us to evaluate, it's long overdue for us to stop using antiquated anecdotes about stories like the story of Khawla in the Quran, right? In Surah Al-Mujadila, where we're so busy saying, he called her like you're like my mother's back, when in reality the story is not about that he said you're like my mother's back. The story is about that he emotionally and verbally and then physically abused her, right? And the fact that then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimanded him forever in the Quran, that that a woman, an ordinary woman, came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, complained to the Prophet about an argument she had with her husband, where he basically was like, I'm done with you, right? I'm finished with you. And the Prophet said, I can't speak on my own accord. I don't have an answer. She went and cried out to Allah, and Allah revealed Quran in her case, right? She didn't have to be a prophet for Allah to answer her. She didn't have to be, she didn't have to be Queen of Egypt for Allah to answer her. She literally was a woman in her home having a fight with her husband, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Quran in her case. That we have to stop also using the Quran and using the tradition of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam to try to put ourselves in positions of power that are not benefiting the whole of us as a community. So it means we have to become more truthful, right? Sometimes telling the truth about certain verses in the Quran, don't make us feel so good. Don't make us look so good when we tell, well, this is what this verse was about. It sometimes is self-implicating, right? Like even there are verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reprimanding the women. He's reprimanding the wives of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, right? For things that they were doing. We have to tell the truth about that. We have to tell the truth about that, just like Allah Ta'ala gave an issue about nushuz when women are guilty of nushuz in the Quran. He also talks about, and it's actually more severe, but that's a whole nother matter, right? When he deals with men of nushuz in the Quran, but we only talk about women in nushuz, right? Or in the case of, we don't want to be apologist Muslims, where even when we're trying to set the record straight and bring women back to their rightful place, we don't want to deny the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was also checking women about certain aspects. So I think, again, it becomes time for us to, and when we're not giving these current today, we're not putting it in modern day terms for people, right? Then it has no application sometimes to our families, to our situations. And so I think it's time for us to, start writing and writing things from our perspective.
As we start to bring this to a close, let me give the people on a line to present some of your questions. I'm not going to be able to get every question. There's a lot, so I'm going to be a little selective. Please, if you don't get selected, no, it just comes for lack of time, nothing from my heart, but I'm going to just go down and grab some of the questions. So the first one is, should we examine our Islamic roots in West Africa and see how it relates to what we need to develop here?
I believe 100%, and I think there's a healing in that. And many Black Americans who are Muslims, and Black Americans in general, when we talk about our sojourn in our life here in America, we started off that we were enslaved chattel of the white man, where in fact we were people with a history and a heritage before not only we were enslaved, but that Black people, Muslims, came to America before Columbus got lost coming over here. And Tariq al-Sudan by Asadi writes about this. So we know about Abu Bakr al-Thani, who was related to Mansa Musa. We know for a fact, and even non-Muslims, Ivan Van Sertima wrote about this in the book called They Came Before Columbus, right? That we were a people of civilization from West Africa. We were literate. We came from high refined culture. And it was Islamic. And we were here as free people before we were enslaved by the British and by others. So I think that's very important for us. And I'll tell you something that was very therapeutic for me was to go over to Goree Island, right? That was very therapeutic for me. I'll tell you this really quick story. We were all together. Ustad Ieasha was there. We were there and we visit the area of where our ancestors were taken off to the sea. And there's the sea right there. So some of the brothers went and started reciting Hizb Bahr by Imam Shadhili, radiallahu anhu. So they were showing us the area of where our ancestors were enslaved. And I remember I was hugging Dr. Ware and we were like sobbing, you know, at the situation because it was so horrible about the stories we heard and how they were living. Then there was a brother, who's our guide, our tour guide. He's Baifal. For those of you who know about Baifal, he's from the Tariqatul Muridiyya. And he looked at me and I had tears in my eyes. And he said, you know, when the Tubab means white man. When the Tubab, they called this the door of no return, the point of no return, because they believed that when our people were taken from this place, that they were gone forever and they were never going to return. But he said, Alhamdulillah, you all are here. The children of Islam have returned. You're here. And he came up and hugged me. That was therapeutic for me. I'm telling you, that was therapeutic for me. So I do believe that we should learn about this history and who we were before we were brought here, as well as study. And I'm not saying being carbon copies, because we're not carbon copies of Senegalese and Gambians, right? We have our own experiences and we live here. We can't copy everything that is done in Senegal or in Gambia, but there are some things that we can learn from how Islam is practiced in West Africa, especially when it comes to in those sacred spaces with men and women, in the transmission of knowledge to our sisters. I think it's something that we could benefit from by hearing these stories and even going to witness it with our own eyes.
I want to pick up from where Imam Dawud left that story, is that as we were all standing on the banks of the Atlantic Ocean, we then all climbed back up and went through the door of no return. You know, saying that not only have we returned, we come back through the door. And so there's an enormous amount of healing in all of that. Actually, that was part of my journey for how I became Muslim, actually, as a result of spending time in Senegal. I think Imam Dawud also hits on a very important point. There is something to be learned, definitely from our West African brothers and sisters on two aspects, definitely from a scholarship standpoint, but also there's something to be learned about the more immediate effects of colonization and occupation. And how that, you know, and how it can be seen in terms of some of the division that it has created as they have gotten their independence from the British and the French, even, you know, much later than what we would consider abolition of slavery to some degree. So there's a lot to learn from that, right? Just like you learn a lot from your grandmother and your grandfather, there's a lot to learn from going back to Senegal, to Gambia, to Ghana, to Nigeria. There's a lot to learn. In addition to be honest, one of the greatest things I witnessed is about how they instill Quran in their children. First, there is Quranic meanings, and then they are very dedicated, yes, to their children memorizing, but also in terms of that being a part of their tradition, that they don't lose it, right? That the Quran is not lost amongst them. There's a lot to be said in terms of their the full development of Islamic education, but that's something that we can, there's a lot that can be done in terms of the healing and the development on both sides of that equation. So I mean, we have a lot to learn, even about, for example, Sidi Rikaya Inyas, who actually wrote a book called The Rights of Women in Islam, who's the daughter of Sheikh Ibrahim Inyas. She's 93 at this point. And I got a chance to meet her not too long ago. And subhanAllah, you know, how she is revered, how she is respected in her community, amongst her, you know, among not just her family, but she's you know, she's a great Shaykha, and people come to her, like hundreds of people come and visit her and ask for her dua. There's a lot to be learned about the respect and the place of female scholarship inside of West Africa traditionally, and we have a lot of books to read and catch up on and to deliver. As we're teaching from the other texts, we also have to teach some of their texts. Right? We don't talk about African scholarship. We don't bring that often in our masajid. And so there's a lot to be, you know, done with that. Inshallah khair.
Here's a question, and it's related to Shaykha Ieasha. What is your advice for sisters that have become complacent in their marginalization? How would you get them out of the kitchen?
La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Well, number one, free her from the kitchen. Right? Free her from the kitchen. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barik Sayyidina Muhammad. You know, there's when I went to study, and people would have considered me rebellious, because in order to study, I had to be rebellious. Now, are we ready for that? Like, there was no institution inside of America, right, that I could study in that would teach me aqidah. I could learn tajweed, alhamdulillah. I could even take a couple of Arabic classes at the masjid. But in terms of how was I going to, you know, read Quran, like understand the meaning of the Quran, how was I going to excel beyond that? I could read Quran, but I didn't know any aqidah. I didn't know any fiqh. So I actually had to say, you know what, I'm going to Egypt. I'm, you know, and that for people like, you're going to travel? And what about your mahram? My father's not Muslim, and I'm the youngest of 6 girls. I haven't got any brothers, right? I don't have anybody. I don't have a father or an uncle or a brother who's going to take me overseas to go study with me. So it was like, I'm about to get on this plane. And when people were like, what about your mahram? What about this? What I was like, you coming with me? You gonna support me? Right? Okay, I'm about to get on this plane. Even in the case of me going to study to Yemen, I feel like, you're going to Yemen? You're going to go study in the desert by yourself? There were many women who wanted to go study, but they, of course, they were taught this is haram for you to do. This is, you know, you don't have mahram. You're trying to be a feminist. You want to be the imam. I was like, listen, I'm trying to learn aqidah. I'm trying to learn who is Allah. And if you're not going to teach me, there's no institution at this point where I can go. I'm getting on this plane. So we all have to, when we're talking about, you know, are women complacent? Not everybody's going to learn online. Not to mention, I don't recommend it. Some of the greatest lessons I learned in fiqh is what I learned from sitting in the presence of my teachers. So if we want our women to learn and to be excited about learning, there are 2 things. Number one, we have to let them know, after having been told so long. You know, there's one person saying in the chat that, you know, it's like Islam is seen as the deen for men. By many, it's not true. 100% that is a lie. 100% that is a lie. But the way it has been presented as such. So a person who feels like, you know, I don't know about female scholars. I don't never hear about them in the masjid. I definitely don't hear about Black female scholarship. I don't hear about women's issues from the minbar. Then I don't feel like this is relevant to me. And, you know, where is it that I can go and feel comfortable and feel empowered to learn? And if men are if men are learning, are they coming back and teaching their families? Are they coming back and teaching their wives? Are they coming back and teaching their daughters in a loving, embracing, and warm manner? And if they say, you know what, I'm not qualified to teach, are you prepared to get up and move your family to somewhere where she can learn, where she can find excitement about the deen? Because even when I made the decision to go study, it was literally about I'm trying to save my deen. Because everybody else is just standing around me telling me about what's haram and what I can't do. I need to know what Allah has made permissible for me to do. And so, again, I say that, we want women. It's so funny. We claim we want Ieasha until she shows up. Right? Asking all them questions, huh? Asking all them questions. Right? Until she shows up. Right? We claim we want a Khadija until that boss woman shows up in our home. And so I just say part of the way to help your woman out of the kitchen is let her know that you welcome that. Let her know you welcome that.
Imam Dawud, I guess you can take this question and you can fill in. I would like to jump in, but I'm a moderator, so I have to leave it alone. But if y'all, for 1 minute, be too soft, I'm coming. I'm letting you know now. You don't answer this question properly, I'm coming.
Jump in, Jake. Jump in right now. Right? Jump in right now.
What attempts do we make with other Wahhabi communities, if any, or is that too dangerous and volatile to really engage at any level? Because we discussed the problem of Wahhabism in the Black community, and we talked about things that we need to do. So how do we engage with those? And there are many African Americans who are still deeply entrenched in that Wahhabi Salafi ideology. How do we deal with that, and how do we, work with them? That's the question. I added some stuff, but that's the meaning of the question.
Surah Al-Ahraf, the 199th ayah. Khudul af, wa'mu bil-urf, wa'adul al-jahilin. Those 3 commands, right? We take towards pardoning, then we, because we know that there are many people who are jahl basit, all of them aren't jahl rakab. There's some people who are just sincere, but they've been given improper information. So we have to be generous in giving people the benefit of the doubt. And then we talk to people and engage people in discussion as long as they're not hostile. If it comes to nothing but hostility and nothing but a bunch of, and this is my opinion, based upon this, my understanding of this ayah, if the discussion and the engagement can't be civil and it becomes to being hostile, then the last command is wa'adul al-jahilin, and then you just avoid and stay away from ignoramuses and people who are being hostile in their engagement to the point that ends up becoming something that is overly contentious that can breed enmity towards people. And I know of cases of people getting into arguments in front of or after Salatul Jum'ah, where literally brothers end up getting into fisticuffs, right? And we don't want to see anything like that. I've literally seen this, like back in the day, back in the 90s, I've literally seen people go to blows with people because they come and question them, where is Allah, right? And then if you don't answer the question right, the next thing you know, they start going back and forth, and then, people start throwing blows. So that's my opinion on an individual level. As far as the leadership and engaging them, and I know you've been involved in this with some, I call them diet Salafis or Salafi light. There's the ability to have some discussion with people on the leadership level, and there can be some taqrib or some rapprochement and having conversations to look at some social issues and certain things. At the end of the day, we're all Black folks, and we're all dealing with some of the same socio-political issues in America. And I do believe there is some opportunities, but personally, I don't get in any debates with people regarding Aqidah, or they don't think that my thobe is too long, or my pants leg, or my beard's not long enough, or they have a problem with me praying salah. I don't have time I don't even waste my time with debating brothers about stuff like that. That's so 1999, 2000 for me. I don't even get into that.
Shaykha?
I'm for truth, no matter who tells it, right? And so you go ahead and answer that, Imam. I'm referring to you.
You're not getting out of this that easy. I'm giving you a break all night. You got to give some answers here.
What was the question again?
What attempts do we make with our Wahhabi communities, if any? Or is that too dangerous and volatile to really engage in any level? That's a simple question.
اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا مولانا محمد. All my family, other than me, are Christian. I'm the only Muslim in my family. And I engage them all the time. And so leaving them out, for me, this is, trying to, where are we together? Where are we united? Where can we move collectively? Where can we, Imam Dawud had a post at the beginning of this week or the end of last week, when you said, I missed the 90s, right? Well, we could at least debate upon, at least we could get into the Quran and we could at least debate upon like scholarly opinions. I'm different. I'm the woman. I'm always going to say, we want family. Them your cousins. We got to work it. We got to figure it out. We have to communicate with each other. But the arguing didn't get us anywhere. It just got us splintered communities, broken hearts, and it didn't get us anywhere. So as Imam Dawud already mentioned, in terms of debating this or that, for what? If we want to have a genuine conversation, a sincere conversation, right, about Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we want to have a sincere conversation about that, then Bismillah, then let's grow and let's learn, right? Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, I never entered into a debate unless I was hoping that I would lose. Why? So that it would be that when I heard that, if I could hear truth from the tongue of my brother, right? So if we are engaging from that perspective, then let's get it. But if we're engaging from the perspective of let me massage my ego, then no, I'm not for it, right? Then I got some adhkar for that. So
Oh, you done? Let me answer that question. And I'll say it in two ways. I agree with both of you. And then in another thing, I want to add some. I won't even say I disagree with you. I agree with you, but I think some things need to be added. When we look at the condition of Black people in America, we have to begin to realize that a serious game has been played on us, both through white supremacy, and it came directly through slavery, and it has reached us another way through our Islam. And we have been affected the most by the treachery of white supremacy coming through Islam, destroying the Muslim world, and it has landed in our lap and destroyed our families and everything we're talking about. So from this aspect, I think a means of telling the truth and saying that courageously and boldly needs to take place. I agree, we shouldn't spend our time arguing. But at the same time, I think some of us who have spent our time learning this tradition need to be like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. During the time of the conflict with Al-Mu'tazila, who just said in their belief was that the Quran was created, which was a belief that contradicted the belief of Ahl Sunnah, and that they said that the slave creates his own deeds. He didn't just say, oh, this is a theological argument, let's leave it alone. He went to prison, he was whipped, and even in those conditions, they asked Imam Ahmad, because some scholars, they took the passive position. You know, let's just say something to get it, wipe it away. Imam Ahmad, he said no. He said no. He said, when the scholar remains silent in the face of falsehood, when is the truth ever going to manifest itself? And I think one of the greatest disservices that us as Black leaders who have studied Islam with Asanid, with the proper sciences of Al-Asha'ira and Maturidiyya, and knowing Al-Madhahib al-Raba'a and Ilm al-Tasawwuf, to the point that we are even afraid to say the word Tasawwuf and say Sufism. We say, oh, tazkiyah, spiritual purification. This doesn't help us. In fact, this impairs us and further continues the oppression that we're suffering now is just through religion. So I think from us, there is a need to speak the truth of Islam, to finally educate our people in what Islam has conveyed from the Prophet to our day, so we don't have a constant do-over. And that's challenging because you're going to face people who stand on falsehood. So I say, be like Abu Hanifa, be like Malik, be like Shafi, be like Ahmed, be like Imam al-Baqilani, be like Imam al-Ghazali, be like Sayyid al-Bouti, Sayyid al-Imam, Sayyid Muhammad Sayyid Ramadan al-Bouti, and many of the great ulama. And I want to give you something that all of you two definitely are aware of, and I mentioned to others. A few years ago in Chechnya, they had a major convention where they brought over 200 scholars of Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah to Chechnya, who was under Soviet domination at one time, under communism. And they had a major convention, and all of our teachers of Ahl-Sunnah from around the world attended that, and they excluded the Wahhabis. They excluded them. And they had the name of the conference, Manhum Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Who are Ahl-Sunnah? These are all the people that we follow. We say they are our shuyukh. That's what they did. They didn't run from this issue. And I think in America, it's high time that we stop running from issues. We don't got to argue, but we do got to clarify the truth. And I think this is extremely important. And that's just my $5 towards.
And that's how you get Imam Amin to go ahead and speak up.
But I have something else to add on, Sheikh Amin, and the implications even run deeper, is that this understanding of Islam that many people have learned, even passively, that detaches itself from proper interpretive methodology, where you can just pick up the Quran and pick up the Hadith and read on their own, without a methodology, without asanid. What then has happened is people have then gone into academia, into Western academia, and pick up these books, and they think that they can apply these secular books and these things that come out of critical theory, be it critical gender studies or whatever, that really that goes back to Marxism, if we want to be quite frank about it, right? Their sheikh unknowingly is Karl Marx and Engels, right? And then they read the Quran and read the ahadith, come up with their own understandings, but from an epistemology that comes from secular white Western thought processes of how to judge the truth, right? And this is nothing but an extension of Wahhabi influence, Now many of the people, they wouldn't see it that way because they think that maybe that they've become woke, or or they don't have an outward practice that is Wahhabi in nature, but the fiqh, or the understanding of how they look at Islam in the text, really is birthed from the same understanding. And I can't overemphasize that enough, that there's a correlation with that.
We have to close out, but there is one question, and it was on the flyer, but this stuff is a lot of stuff to unpack. And the issue of, where does that question go? Oh, the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter, the movement, the organization. Do we march with them? Why or why not? What is the opinion of Ustadh Ieasha Prime and Imam Dawud Walid? So that was a question, and inshallah, if y'all can address that. Whoever wants to go first.
I'm gonna let Imam Dawud, if you will allow me, Imam, just to go first, because I know you recently had an article about this, and so you know, the first thing is that when it comes to protest, there's the movement of Black Islam, period, has been Black Lives Matter. The movement of what we have been about from the beginning, from the moment Islam arrived on the shores of America, has been about Black Lives Matter, right? Has been about making sure that it has always been a movement of self-sufficiency, a movement of resilience, a movement of galvanizing the people. That's always what it's been about, right? Going back to our communities and calling them, whether it was about pulling them out of the heroin house, out of the drug house, taking them out of prostitution, whether it was the movement of Sheikh Dawud Tawfiq, whether it was the movement of the nation, whether it was that's what we have been. The Islamic Party, historically, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, going on for us, that our Islam has always been intricately involved in terms of an aspect of activism that has been in support of Black lives, right? That is all. That's where we come from. So for us, you know, in terms of hashtag Black Lives Matter, in terms of joining certain movements, you know, because you believe they have traction and they're moving it forward. I'm going to let Imam Dawud and let our political commentary talk about that. There's a lot to be said about protesting. In terms of protesting, has accomplished quite in terms of what they, you know, even just bringing information around what does it mean to defund police, even bringing about conversations that were not, you know, had before, even, you know, having police officers brought up on charges. There is a lot that happened during those days of protest that is something to be applauded. My concern is that while the protests are going on, again, and I'm addressing something that's aside, while the protests are going on, the bodies are stacking up. That while the protests are going on, there are 8 bodies that are found lynched and told that they committed suicide while hanging from trees. That while the protests were going on, that our brothers and sisters were still being shot and killed in Louisville, Kentucky, in Buffalo, New York, in Louisiana, in Atlanta, Georgia. The bodies were still stacking up. So for us, what I think is essential for us to begin to address is that although we are addressing issues of policing right now, the brutality of the police, basically state sanctioned violence, as we're addressing that, me personally, I'm concerned about I'm like, yes, let's win, let's get it, let's knock it down, the entire system of it. So get ready. Right? As my mama said, don't pray for change if you don't want to move your feet. Right? Don't pray for God to guide you if you don't want to move your steps. Like, as we're fighting for the end of this particular system, what have we built, right, institutionally in order to replace it? And again, if we are still, and it's a simultaneous thing. If we are still dependent upon a system that is built upon our oppression to begin with, how can you become intricately separated from it unless you are in a position to feed, clothe, house, shelter, educate yourself? Right? And so for me, what I'm doing personally is working on what are we doing in terms of what are we building? What schools are we building? What food are we growing? What homes are we building? What land do we have? If it burned down tomorrow, where you gonna go? Right? What relationships have you built? Are we prepared to take, if I'm looking at it, it's not going to end with the police. That's just me personally. Are we prepared to bring them up? Are we prepared to pick up the baton of El Hajj Malik Shabazz and at least take it to the UN and attempt to bring them up on charges? The world is paying attention. Might be a good time to do that. Might be a good time to make hijra. Senegal, Gambia, Ghana. They like, it's time. We're welcoming our brothers and sisters back home. Even if we took an Abyssinian turn, like the Prophet ﷺ, even if we went back to Africa for a time, right, which is in our prophetic tradition, we went back to Africa for a time, galvanized, learned some systems of government, learned some systems of independence. Then we take those lessons and build a society, build some economic structure. Then we have something to come back and fight for. And in addition to, I got a question. What is our relationship with the First Nation communities, right? What do they want? What we're fighting? Oh, Lord, have mercy. I might be going on. What are we? I understand that we're fighting against something, but what are we building in the process while the bodies are stacking up? I'm going to let Imam Dawud and...
I don't really have that much more to add on to what Ustadha Ieasha said. What I will say is two additional things, and one is adding on off of one point that she made, and then I will be crystal clear about another concern. So, two of the most prolific movements for Black folks in the United States of America were the UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association, led by Marcus Garvey, and the Nation of Islam. And there's one thing that both of those movements had in common, and that was doing for self. And as Ustadha Ieasha mentioned, is doing for self in a number of different ways. They had their own self-defense mechanisms, right? They had their own sort of like constitution and their own type of like language and nomenclature. I mean, the old man came up with words like tricknology. Like he wasn't even copying everyone else's English. He even made up new terms, right? And they funded themselves without looking for those outside themselves to fund them, because if those outside of them fund them, then they help control the agenda, right? Yeah. And so this is something that's very important that we talk about. Now, we have Black Lives Matter, which is a hashtag in the start of it that started with Trayvon Martin's murder. That's all good and that's real. And Black lives are supposed to matter because they never been equal to white lives in the socio-political context of over 400 years of what we call America, and even before 1776. That's a reality. Our folks that have been protesting on the streets out of pain and out of wanting to see justice, this is something that long precedes a Black Lives Matter movement. People have been doing this before any of us were alive, doing these things. El Hajj Malik Shabazz led a protest against the NYPD in 1957 when a nation member got beat upside his head by the NYPD, which led to the largest settlement in the history of New York City, right? Led by our brother, right? So this is a long thing. Now, the organization, we're talking about Black liberation. I don't think that white liberal money that's primarily funding an organization is going to lead to the liberation of black folk. In fact, I believe that there's an agenda behind it, and I believe that many of us who got into that movement are being unknowingly used for another agenda, right? So there are good parts of the platform of Black Lives Matter organization, but tell me what good is in the platform of the destruction of the nuclear family of man, woman, and child, especially for black folks, when we come from a history in this country of our families being split up by the white slave master, of our men being emasculated and our children being sold off, and our women feeling like they don't have protection from our men folk where the two-bob slave master could come and rape our women at any time. And what benefit is that for our liberation, for the destruction of the family? And what benefit that they talk about they want to demolish heteronormativity? And what benefit is that for black people if black lives really matter for the destruction of black family and the emasculation of the heterosexual or the conventional male, or as the hadith says, qayyum wahid, at the time that was predicted, where there would be 50 imra'a, that there would be 50 women for every one upright man. And note the hadith doesn't say for every one dhakar. Doesn't say 50 women for every one male, right? It's 50 women for every one real upright man, right? So and then Ustad Ieasha also mentioned about what are they, what are we actually building? And I will say this too, that we have to be careful about imanophobia. Like, we have the term Islamophobia. What about imanophobia, right? Where there is literally hostility to what we actually believe and hold sacred. And don't think for a second that this leftist agenda, that if we don't capitulate to their standards, that they're not going to come after and start to assault openly Islamic beliefs. It's already starting to take place, right? So there's an agenda behind this, and we shouldn't be naive, right? So should we organize ourselves against police brutality? Of course. Should we be against mass incarceration? Of course. But why can't we imagine ourselves being leaders and come up with our own platform that we're going to advocate and introduce to our people? As Allah, as Wajal says in the Quran, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nasi ta'muru bil-ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah." We're supposed to be the leaders of enjoying the good and forbidding the evil, not trying to run underneath everyone else's umbrella, especially if they're funded by non-black money, their seed money, right? And how they have an agenda that is part of that is advancing the weakening of our already family structures in our communities that are teetering and not stable as they should be. We're trying to strengthen the family because we can't have strong community life without healthy families. So I just have to make that to be very clear about that. But can we work with people who aren't Muslim and aren't black folks, but black folks? Of course we can, right? Of course we can, but we should be doing it on our terms instead of repeating everyone else's nomenclature, everyone else's slogans, and taking their platform as a type of aqidah, right? Because that's unfortunately what I see. I see many Muslims have taken the so-called progressive left platform and have taken it as a type of political aqidah, when in fact, some of it is regressive. It's not progressive. You want to break up the black family? That's regressive. It's not progressive, right? If you're trying to do away with the divine construct of gender, because gender is a divine construct according to the Quran. It's not a man-made construct. If you're trying to undo that, That's not progressive, that's regressive. That's going against Allah's word. That's making war against Allah and his messenger. By Allah it is. Right? So we have to be very careful about how we engage this whole Black Lives Matter movement. We need a little more, we need a little nuance, we need a little sophistication, right? When we deal with these movements. And Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair. You know, there's just a couple of points I wanted to make, if I'm allowed. And you know, there is a deep. This one brings us back to the beginning of the conversation. There is a deep level of deep-seated pain in our community that has gone unaddressed for so long, and that deep unseated, you know, that deep unaddressed pain has put us in a position where there's a deep sense of guilt, right? And there's a deep sense of guilt and a deep sense of responsibility that when we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and you know, I'm not the one to speak on. I'm not at all. You know, we'd have to speak to the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of who's funding it. You know, as they say, follow the money. You know, in terms of who's funding it, what is their agenda? I think there is something to be said about looking at not necessarily the support of LGBTQ openly, as it is about there is a desire in terms of undermining. And again, I'm not talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. We'd have to speak to the leaders of those and the funding of that. And I know each one of it, you know, each one of their sections or whatever have different funding, and Allah knows best. I know there are a number of Muslims who are involved in that, and Allah knows best. What I am talking about is that when we allow our principles to be corrupted, and because of a level of hurt that we feel. And what I mean by that hurt and that guilt is because there are a number of unaddressed deep issues, Imam, that are in our community. This is going to open a can of worms, and inshallah, you can bring on some experts to address in the build up for the next section. But there are, for example, the Muslim community failed to address major issues as it relates to child molestation, as it relates to abuse, where people were looking at abuse and say, if that's the definition of a man, I don't want to be that. Where women were saying, if women are in a position of weakness, then I don't want to be that. That if that is the definition of gender, because there's a difference between the biological sex, right? And of course, the gender that is a social construct, meaning you have determined that this is how I must act and how I must behave and how I must be. Right, as opposed to what Islam says about the joining of these two concepts and where they meet, what Allah and His Messenger have defined for us, as Imam Dawud mentioned, as a divine construct, what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has placed on us. There is so I think there is this joining where because we understand the intersectionality of race, of gender, of the problems that are connected to race and gender and even religion. There's a feeling that if we don't support them, right, in this, right, because their lives matter, meaning as human beings, if we don't support them, then we ourselves will not get our rights, right? However, there is an understanding from that I have a responsibility to Allah and His Messenger. That I have a responsibility as I'm upholding Islamic values, as I'm upholding maqasid al-sharia, the preservation of life, as I'm upholding the preservation of lineage, as I'm upholding the preservation of mind, right? That I recognize that there's a multitude of issues on this side of the table that have to be addressed in order to address this properly. And again, I'm not an expert on this, but in terms of what we do have to address in terms of how hypermasculinity led to pornography and how that affected in terms of same-sex attraction, how we have to deal with how our culture addressed things like the degradation of women and how women were like, well, if that's how women are, I don't want to be that. We've got to address the breakdown of the Black family and how that led to, you know, to people deciding I don't fit in this box, in your definition of gender. We've got to address the rampant molestation and child abuse, and we got to address those issues that are just like gaping, bleeding holes in our community, so that when we get on the other side, right, and now it's time for us to fight for our basic human, you know, right to live. We're on the battlefield fighting, you know, fighting for our basic right to live, while at the same time trying to address these, you know, people who are bleeding on the battlefield spiritually and otherwise. But the job of the Muslim is for us to say, I recognize that you have the right to be saved physically, mentally, and spiritually. That is, and I have the response that's not a that part of your wholeness is about how do we embrace divine decree. That part of your wholeness and your peace and fighting for your right, because as Imam Dawud mentioned, that our existence is resistance, right? That our existence is resistance. So how we come together and how we multiply and how we do that from a perspective of peace is important. While we're fighting decolonization, we've got to realize what is the colonization of bodies. We got to realize when this concept got introduced to our community. We got to address when we're talking about colonization of bodies and what they did to Black men for us to be, and Black women to get to this place. To say I fall down and I submit to it and that's just who I am, no, sir. I'm so sorry. That there's a collective healing that has to be had. And I think, you know, and there's just this one, you know, in terms of when we got to recognize that Islam is the radical middle way, right? So you pulling me too far to the conservative side, right? That too far on this side ain't gonna work. And pulling me too far, right, to the Marxists, people of no religion, the people of no God, the people who believe in no soul, there is a white supremacy on both sides of this equation. There is a destruction for the Black Muslim. There is a destruction for Black folk. There is a destruction for Black humanity. There is a destruction for Blackness on both sides of this equation. And in saving life, we have at least to give you the healing balm of what Islam offers. At least understanding who you are and who you're meant to be, while employing all the people necessary. Get all the doctors on the field to address the gaping holes. But our existence is resistance. We need our Black men. We need our Black women. In the divine construct, Allah created them. And none of that stops us as Muslims from building on building our own movements, where we're not having these discussions on none of us stops us from moving forward in the direction we always have, with the legacy we have, building on that. As he said, with our own language, our own pedagogy. Nothing stops us from that, other than the belief that we won't succeed unless we partner. You know, not to say we don't need allies, but unless we compromise certain beliefs, we think we won't succeed. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu aminu billahi wa rasulih. Oh, you who believe in Allah and His Messenger. وَكِتَابُ الَّذِي نَزَلَ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ, and the book that Allah revealed to the Messenger. Right? In Surah An-Nisa 136. When Allah said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu billah. Oh, you who believe in Allah. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barik Sayyidina Muhammad. May Allah grant us healing and shifa. May Allah grant us healing and shifa. And grant us us true liberation, and grant us the ability to see colonization from whatever it comes. Grant us the ability to see the devil where he coming from, the right or the left. May the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam told us Shaitan would wait for us on the straight path. He would be waiting for the believer on the straight path. While you on the path of justice, right? I'm right there waiting for you. May Allah Ta'ala give us the ability to hold on to the rope of Allah and not deviate for a minute. May we never be tricked by Shaitan. May Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala grant us true liberation from colonization on every front. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. May Allah grant us victory. Amen.
Well,
yeah.
we already know, according to the Facebook post, who's going to be our next run for president. It's Prime. That's what they said. Prime for president.
Yeah, we're going to build these houses. We're going to get some food. And we're going to educate these children.
May Allah open for you. Barakallahu feekum. May Allah reward both for you. Inshallah, we'll try to arrange another time where we can flush out with more solutions to all these things we're talking. I pray that Allah grants everyone benefit from this session. The numbers show that the people are extremely interested in what was being mentioned. And inshallah, I just hope we continue the conversation and we continue the work. Inshallah, Shaykha, Ieasha, could you give us the pleasure of calling us out with one of your powerful du'as that we're all in need of?
Allah, may Allah help us. Give us a dua. Give us a dua from Him that He will accept. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad. Ya Allah, I ask you by your infinite mercy, give us a complete and perfect faith after which there is no disbelief. Ya Rabbi, give us certainty in you after which there is no doubt, and make us firm upon Sirat al-Mustaqim. Ya Rabbi, give us a clarity in our vision by which we are never found to be from amongst the hypocrites. Allah, we ask you that you increase us in wisdom and in guidance. Ya Rabbi, we ask that you protect us from the enemies of you and the enemies of us. Ya Rabbi, push the enemies of you and us far back as the north is from the south. Allah, we ask that you either guide them or remove them from us, Ya Allah. Ya Rabbi, I ask that you please grant us the true liberation by which, Ya Rabbi, you make us independent from those who wish to harm us, Ya Arhamur Rahimeen. Allah, I ask that you please bless our men. Bless them to stand upright. Bless them to be righteous. Bless them to provide for their families. Ya Rabbi, bless them to be amongst those who protect their women and their children. Ya Rabbi, bless them to be compassionate where they need to be firm where they need to be. Increase them in wisdom in every case. Ya Rabbi, I ask that you please bless our women, Ya Allah. Bless them as mothers and as wives. Bless our men as fathers and as husbands. Ya Rabbi, bless our children. Bless us to come together, Ya Rabbi, as a strong unit, standing up and bearing witness for you, Ya Allah. Ya Rabbi, make us to be from amongst those, Ya Rabbi, who establish true justice, Ya Allah, who are not afraid to do that. Ya Rabbi, save us from every form of cowardness, Ya Rabbi, cowardliness and niggardliness. Allah, I ask you by your mercy that you give us victory over our ailments, give us victory over our sicknesses and our diseases, and give us a heart and a mind, Ya Rabbi, that's willing to admit where we are broken. Ya Rabbi, give us a heart and a mind that's willing to admit when we're ignorant. Ya Rabbi, I ask that you please bring our community together, all aspects. Ya Rabbi, make us strong, Ya Arhamur Rahimeen. Ya Rabbi, bless us to truly be a representation of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah, I ask that you please heal us when we're sick. Ya Rabbi, wherever we are confused, Ya Rabbi, guide us. Wherever we are in chaos, Ya Rabbi, give us peace. Wherever we have fallen down, Ya Rabbi, pick us up. And whenever we fall too weak, Ya Rabbi, to hold on to your rope, I beg you, Ya Rabbi, hold on to us. Ya Al-Muhammad, please build a fortress of your protection around us, Ya Allah, and cradle us in your comfort and envelop us in your love. Bless our marriages to be ones of greatness. Bless our marriages to be ones of excellent companionship and compassion and comfort and in care and protection, Ya Allah. Allah, I ask you that you please, when the angel of death comes to take our souls, let it take, Ya Rabbi, let our souls be taken while you're pleased with us. Let our souls be taken, Ya Rabbi, by which we're certain you will grant us Jannatul Firdaus al-Ala. Ya Rabbi, when have mercy on us when they lower us into the grave. Let it be the hand of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam who pulls us out. Ya Rabbi, let it be next to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam that we stand on the day of judgment. That let it be his blessed hand that we take a drink from the hawd. Ya Rabbi, let us drink from the cup of felicity. Let us drink from the cup of truth. Ya Rabbi, grant us a light from your light, an honor from your honor, a dignity from your dignity. Ya Rabbi, bless our imams, our teachers, our scholars, our activists, the protesters. Ya Rabbi, grant them victory. All of those who are writing, those who are working hard, Ya Rabbi, to grant us liberation and to free us. Ya Rabbi, grant us victory, Ya Aziz. Ya Allah, we call upon you by every name you've named yourself, that you've revealed to your creation or to your prophets. We ask you for success and the best in this dunya and the akhirah. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barik ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam wa alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Bisir Fatiha. Bismillah. May Allah protect us. I can't hear you, Imam. Oh. Jazakumullah alf khair. I'm not sure what happened to Imam Amin. Imam Dawud, you're muted.
Yeah. I see Sheikh Amin dropped off. I think you are the conclusion, so maybe it's your time to exit.
All right. See you next time.
Okay.